third season of the Now Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser podcast. We changed things up a bit with a name change, and the podcast is full of diverse guests who have fascinating stories of how they are leading their own lives, taking risks, serving others, and loving the lives they lead. They will share how they lead their own lit-up lives, how they achieved inner peace and joy, and the work they did to get there, and continue to do to stay there. Join Debbie this season as she digs in, shares how she started and continues to love herself, love those around her, and love the work she feels called to do. This season, you will hear some real and deep areas of Debbie's life as she shares the work she has done and continues to do to lead her own life in the hopes that through her experiences, you might be able to move into a more lit up life yourself. Listen in as she shares experiences, stories, and tools to help you. Now let's get started.
Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Faith Infused Leadership. I am really excited about today's guest. Dawn Long has joined me, and we're going to dive right in and dig into a conversation. Dawn and I met through a mutual friend, Lizette, who I have worked with in the past. And we've had a conversation about the work that he does. And I'm really intrigued by the work that you do, Dawn, and kind of your trajectory, your past, what you've come from and where you're headed, and also this whole idea about a blueprint and how we have a spiritual DNA, right? That's kind of been given to us. So why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your past experience so people can get to know you, and then let's dive in and have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, over the last almost 40 years now, 38 or so, I have either started or founded or co-founded 6 different businesses. And the last 2, I sold one in the early 2000s. And then the last one I sold at the end of 2018. And so I've been involved with business and people for most of my adult life. And I've always loved leadership in a sense of being able to communicate and bring the best out of people, finding those hidden treasures, those gifts and talents, the abilities that people bring to the corporations that I ran, and being able to actually get them out of them. And sometimes they're really, or most of the time, what I found is they were really even unaware that they had that within them. And that to me has always been the part that gives me the goosebumps and makes me feel fulfilled, is being able to actually see someone transform into who they really are from the beginning, but they weren't even sure of it. And so, through the businesses, everyone in business has to make a profit at whatever product, service, or result that you're offering your clients. And we did focus on 4 or 5 things when we were leading the last company, especially, which was the largest one that I ran. But the last company that I ran, we had over about $100 million in sales over the time that I ran it. So it was a pretty good sized company with a lot of moving parts. And but what I found is that we always worked on, and what my passion started being, and it was almost accidental in one sense, but we moved into our new corporate headquarters in 2012, and it was in the Raleigh-Durham area, North Carolina. And from that point, I was able to actually, we had other locations, but I was in North Carolina, but I was able to actually bring the senior team, I like to call them, or the inner circle, or the top leadership, and really start training with this new corporate office. And what I found over time that I kind of fell into the rhythm of was we made business about growth and change. And we focused on those things first before we talked about the ROI, or we talked about their task as much as, and how that would help the company grow. And doing that got people more engaged. What I found is it was a simple way to get engagement from everyone on your team, whether they're at the top level or at the bottom, so to speak. I hate to use that word, but entry level positions, sure. Because it became an ecosystem of culture that they would hear everybody talk about growth and change, because it was just a natural occurrence of what we talked about. And it actually led me down this path of realizing that people have certain gifts and talents and abilities and blueprints in them. And then I started digging in that and ended up writing a book about it. But that's kind of been my journey over the last 30 some years.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And I have a question, because you were talking about how you kind of accidentally came across this thought process that you had, but have you always Well, let me ask this. When was there ever a light switch moment for you that said, you know what, I love leading and managing people and companies, but I need to now shift and pivot and go in a different direction to make a bigger impact? Because you're making a bigger impact today, right?
That's right. Um, I think I've got to the end of, um, I don't know if there was one thing, but 2017 was kind of a pivotal year where I got this download, if you will,
Yeah.
of this kind of vision, and it actually came through. I did audio notes basically, and that's how I ended up writing the book, from the audio notes. And so that's how I did that was my second book. But I got download, and I was coaching a friend of mine at the time who was a world-class musician, kind of a left brain guy, and he wanted to sell a certain product and service that he could offer in sound and lighting. And he's world class. Like, if you know the old bands like Led Zeppelin or whatever, he could have done lighting for Led Zeppelin. He was that good, so he had the skill set,
Right.
but he was unsure about his ability to sell and to communicate. And so he lived in the city that we actually went to church together. I've known him for probably 8 years, and he called me one day and said, "Can we have coffee?" And so through those encounters with him, and him being transformed, he was a caterpillar and then he became a butterfly right before my eyes. I realized, wait a minute, this whole message has a lot more impact than what I'm living. And that's kind of, if there was one pivotal point that it was actually him. And when I seen in 6 weeks his business explode and grow, and he had technically never sold anything. And of course I talk about sales as communicating and influence. I don't really use the sales jargon that most people do, but it was just so cool. And when I seen that, I realized something lit up inside of me as well. And I'm big on finding the things that make you come alive personally. And okay, why did that do that? And how can I do more of that? Because that engages everything about me to be the best me to the world around me.
Right. And Don, why do you like, I have my own opinions about this, but why do you think that's so important as a leader?
Oh, wow. If life sucks all the time, you're not going to be a good leader. So here's the way I figure. What we talked about in some of our senior meetings was happy people are productive people, right? Sad people are not. How many depressed people and sad people have you ever seen that were productive?
Yeah.
Zero, right? So our culture at our company became, we wanted one of our core beliefs in the ecosystem was the pursuit of happiness for the individuals there, and finding out how to engage with them, not just at work, but if we could away from work, like what turns you on, what lights you up. That was kind of our language pattern, with our staff, and then the extended staff would have the same kind of conversations. We tried to build that as an ecosystem within our culture. And so what I realize is that happy people are productive people, which seems so obvious. And so if you really, and also check this out, if you want to have influence in anyone's life, whether it's your children, your mate, the people you do business with, do they want to be around someone fully alive or someone depressed? It was like, the light bulb went off for me. And I'm like a mad scientist. I've probably read more personal growth books than most people have thrown away. I tell the story in my sales book because I've always wanted to grow and become better me,
Right.
so that I have something to give away, because that's what really turns me on, is the giving piece, so
Right.
that's kind of how we ended up on there.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say too is it's important as a leader because we need to be happy people, because in order to leading is really, I don't know, I have a firm belief in servant leadership, which servant sometimes has a bad connotation, but it's really about my ability and desire to help other people reach their calling. That is a servant leader, and it requires us to be really self-aware. And
Mhm.
to your point, if I'm unhappy, the people I'm leading are going to be unhappy just because of sheer vibrational energy, right? Like, and to your point, I'd much rather have a conversation with someone that is happy, and it doesn't mean don't feel the feelings,
Right. That's exactly.
right?
That's right.
But and so let me ask you that, like, how, as you're coaching people and they're facing some really tough things, how do you help them feel the feels but still be able to come out on the other side with joy?
Absolutely. So that's a great question, because what happens is that I teach people whatever's real is real, and you got to treat it that way. And you've got to feel the feelings that come with it, but realize that that's just the current reality. That's not forever. And you have to find joy through faith. Joy through faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. So you have to put your picture, what you focus on, you get more of. So you have to put your picture back into the happy place, like Peter Pan. Remember, he lost his happy thought. I tell the story all the time with the people I coach. Remember, he couldn't fly anymore. Why? Because he lost his happy thought. Then when he got it back, he was able to fly again. And I tell people, look, you might be in the mud puddle today of life, but you'll fly again if you just do these things. And I've seen it with my own company. We used to call them bad hair days or bad hair weeks. And we actually gave permission. We had these Nerf guns at the last company that I ran. You know, the Nerf guns, you can shoot people. We had one in every one of the offices in the building. And so at any time, if somebody's having a bad day, they were all authorized by me to go and shoot somebody with their Nerf gun. And if they had to unload it, fine. It didn't matter. And if it scared, it was hilarious. Sometimes somebody would just come in and start shooting people with their Nerf gun. And it just broke the monotony. And what it said is, hey, life is real. Life can be tough. Life sometimes is hard. But look, we're going to get through this because we're a team, right? And so from that standpoint, when I talk to people individually, and coach them. Most people that are individuals, they have teams around them. It might be their mate, it might be some loved ones or whatever. And those people care about you enough to help you get through what I call the mud puddle of life right now. But I do, one of the things that you're so right. So much of coaching, I've seen people try to skirt and just stay super positive all the time. And the problem with that is you never actually let people feel the pain of what's real. And if you don't, look, if I had a guy tell me one time, he said, buried pain will resurrect again.
Absolutely.
So if you stuff it, it's going to come back out some way. And I'm like, wow, we don't want to stuff it. We want to get it out and get you, if for lack of better words, throw it up and get rid of it, right. Realize why you have it, and hopefully create some processes where you don't enter back into that same place. You'll enter somewhere else, hopefully with more education, with smarter, brighter, working through your processes. But the goal of helping people grow is to hopefully not end up back in that exact situation, because you take different actions.
Yeah, so. It's funny that you say that, Don, because it makes me think of, I always, like, if people say, oh, I want to go back to this, I'm like, no, you really don't want to go back to that same place, because a good friend of mine and a mentor, he said, you're never at point A and you're never at point B.
Yep.
And if you can just always remember that you're heading towards point B, but the minute you get to point B, you're at A again, and you're not at A because you see the next point B. But I want to back up for a second too, because one of the things I love about what you're saying and how you did this with the Nerf gun, and I love the whole bad hair day and bad hair week, is that for so many years in corporate America as an executive, I heard, keep your personal life separate. You're here to work. Right. And personally, my own philosophy is that doesn't work, because right. We are holistic people. So when you were working and as you coach people, how do you help people see that we're integrated people and that we need to be able to have grace and patience for people, but also run a business?
That's right. You're 100% correct. I used to think just like my dad was old school leadership, and I thought more like his generation. But when I was growing up, you just got to suck it up, and you leave your stuff at home, and you bring. But what I figured out when I started being my own leader and running these companies is that it's impossible for people not to bring some emotional stuff that they might be dealing with at home to work. It's impossible. And this is why we had what we call bad hair days and bad hair weeks. It's like when people are going through things, then the leaders had to give their people access. Hey, do you need to communicate to me? Is there something we can do here to help you? I'm realizing if you're having a problem with your mate, we can't really fix that, but can you tell us, is there something we can help with here? And so we tried to have a large level of empathy. In the last company that I ran, the greatest thing is relying on other people's gifting that is more powerful than you. This is what I learned so much from leadership. I had this lady who was in effect my vice president of HR, and she had the largest amount of empathy of anybody in the company. So when there was an issue, and she was kind of like a mother too, so when there was an issue, we'd say, okay, you got to go talk to Katie. And Katie would, because of her gifting and her calling,
Right.
9 times out of 10 would either fix it or figure out some things to help with it. And it was like, wow, so I didn't have to deal with every single issue. I dealt with some because they fit me more. And we tried to, in our leadership team, there was probably a dozen leaders that were at the office, but then there were probably a core team of like 5. And out of those 5, they were trustworthy, they were vetted. And so people had any issues, a lot of times they talked to them, and I never heard them unless if it got to my level, and Katie couldn't handle it, it usually was bad. So I had to deal with it. But the thing that you have to realize is that, yeah, if you're coaching an individual, maybe you are just one person, but do the best you can to realize that people have a life 24/7 that they can't disconnect from, even when they're at work. And if you have at least some level of grace and empathy for them, they will love you. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And I find too, Don, that, when somebody's really heard, they're really listened to, and they're struggling with something that may not have anything to do with work, to your point, they love you. And I'm a firm believer that if you're willing to walk through fire for your people, they're willing to walk through fire for you.
Absolutely.
And so kind of thinking about that too, I want to go back to a statement that you made, because you make me think about that we each have a different gift and a different role. And, even biblically, it talks about the finger and the hand, and we all have different roles, right, that we play. And so to me, that speaks to the importance too of having a diverse team, right? Like, as a leader, making sure you're not hiring people that are the same as you. And
Yeah.
so do you have an example or an experience where, like, just give me your thoughts on that, I
I
guess.
have a great example for you. Look, before we instituted the DISC model in
Oh,
our
yeah.
company, and they have one version that the whole corporate team can take the test, and you see how you are corporately. So we
Right.
had about a dozen people take the test, and it gives you a blend of your corporate structure. Well, guess what we found out? We found out that I hired everybody like me. Except for Katie. And so what ended up happening is we started looking at positions. We exclusively use the DISC model. So when we hired someone in any management position, they had to take the test, and we had to identify whether they scored enough in that particular quadrant to be effective in that area. You do not want a D running your HR department.
Mm-hmm.
It won't work. And so you really would like to have an S, and that's what Katie was. She was primarily S. And so what happens is we started recognizing that the only way to hire someone that's not like you or like the team is to make sure that if you, with the roles you're looking to fulfill, what type of model would work best in there. Like if it's sales, it would be usually a DI or an I, and they were the best people. People related to them, and so you had different positions for different things. And boy, when we started doing that, our business exploded, because it was like I just had the idea one day to do this DISC thing, and we did it. And it was early on when we moved into the corporate office, probably 2013-ish time frame. And then we started really focusing on positions as we hired them, and made sure that we picked the right people instead of having to go through 3 or 4 people because they weren't the right fit.
Right. So I want to kind of I want to go into that a little bit, in the fact that when you think about, like, the DISC is an assessment tool to help you uncover sometimes what those talents or those gifts are that you have. I know a big piece of your message is about the fact that we have, I mean, this is my verbiage as far as like a spiritual DNA, and you have this, this idea that we all are given these gifts, and that we have this like DNA structure that was given to us. And for you and I, we call that God. Like, that is our source of that. So tell me a little bit, and the audience a little bit, about what you mean by this blueprint.
Yeah. So the way I look at it, I had a guy from Australia about 15 years ago use this term, and I've never heard anyone else use it. So I've kind of adopted it, because I don't really know where you got it from. But I call it your DNA, which is dominant neurological agenda. You are pre-wired for something before you're born. And what happens with me is, I started identifying as your unique blueprint or your DNA from God, basically. And I had this saying that I use with people, and it is a spiritual saying, that God had a dream and he wrapped your body around it. In other words, he wrapped your body around it in such a way that he gave you the gifts, talents, and abilities to fulfill that dream or that destiny. And so I believe that for every individual, and I believe it's just so much a part of what, if people find who they are, it's really the identity piece. When people find who they are and whose they are, life is wonderful. Yes, there's still problems. Yes, there's still things to overcome, but those factors is really what brings fully aliveness to you. Knowing you're staying in your lane and you're a rock star in your lane. Mm-hmm. And it's like, boy, so when people take the disc, you're familiar with it. You have a list of strengths and a list of weaknesses. And what we would do is I would identify with the people we hired. I would from time to time, or either the people over them, when they did assessments with them, as far as just checking their job and seeing they're doing well and that sort of thing. We would take these strengths and we would look at them and say, what 2 or 3 of those stick out to you or highlighted in our conversations? And then we would get people to actually start understanding through their own accepting of the strengths that are in them, their abilities. And then what would happen out of that is they naturally felt better about themselves because we recognize their strengths, they know their strengths, and now they're going and applying them within the company that you're running. And that's the way our whole ecosystem worked. Was we always realized that people have weaknesses, and weaknesses are magnified under pressure.
Right.
So when you're under pressure, that's when this thing hits you that you tend to, if you go overboard on someone or something like that, the weakness, the tendency of impatience or whatever it might be. And so we all know those things are going to happen. You cannot avoid them all the time. But what you can do is recognize that they're there. And when you do, try to reset your pattern back into, I'm powerful. This is what I really flow in well. And talking about people, when you start telling people what they're good at, that's kind of like wonderful when you're employing people and they are not even familiar with it. And you're building that culture where that's what we want to do for everyone we hire. And it was always talked about. I think the thing about leading people is that, you said if you walk through fire with them, then they'll walk through fire with you, right? And I think the thing about leading people is you need a high level or some level of empathy. I probably have less than I should have, but I have some. But the other piece is you need a relatability factor that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make you the best that you can be within our company. And that come across as palatable, not necessarily said. I love the thought that the leadership is most of the time caught, not taught. You catch it. And you catch it by the essence of the people leading with their nonverbal communication. And if you can get it like that, then you have built a true ecosystem of leadership. If you have to continually tell people stuff over and over again, you do not have the leadership system built within your company, because you're at the elementary stage. You might be building it, but you're at the elementary stage. But as you get to the higher master level stage of it, the leadership skill set is actually caught by the people around you, because you've built such a big ecosystem of culture in it that it's palatable. When they come within your office, they can feel it, taste it, sense it, even if they don't work there. When you have it like that, it becomes more of a spiritual thing. Right. And it's something in the atmosphere that people feel. And it's like the whole happiness thing. Everybody say, well, you can't, people used to ask me, what's your mission statement? I'm like, we just pursue happiness around here. And they're like, it can't be that simple. I'm like, it is. And so we didn't, and people were like, well, tell me, what does that mean at the ROI? I always say, all the business people, all the D's always, well, what's your numbers? What's your percentages? And our percentages were always better than everyone else's. Mm-hmm. In our industry. And if it wasn't better, they were as high as any company we competed against. And so we had the metrics within there that this is the way we roll and this is what we're producing. And most of the people are happy most of the time. Why would I change that?
Yeah. And Dawn, it's so funny because you make me, when you talked about it can be just that simple, right? I
Yeah.
have an easy button sitting on my desk because when I get stressed, I overcomplicate things. And it's a reminder that it's just that easy. And how much we try to complicate things when really, like I've always said, when you look at I'm a college basketball fan. And so when you look at a good college basketball team, it's because they know the basics. They may not all be superstars, and I tend to be a KU basketball fan. I'm sorry, North Carolina fans, although I like your head coach because he was at KU. But when I look at a basketball team, the basketball teams like at KU, they don't necessarily have all these like superstars or one or two superstars. They're potentially even good players, but they focus on the basics. They keep the simplicity of the game versus trying to be showy and do all these things. And so when I think about coaching a team and I think about in a leadership position, to me, the more we can keep things simple, the better off we are. So like even having, it just shows me too how overcomplicated we try to make things, so that when we say happy people produce,
Yeah.
it's that simple.
Yeah, to your point, John Wooden, you're probably familiar with the
Yeah.
story. John Wooden won 11 championships, and I think there were 7 of them or either 9 of them back to back. Nobody in our era has won over 2 or 3, I think, back to back. And one of the things that he taught, and I forget the particular guy that he was teaching it to, but this guy had a great 10-foot jump shot. And he was hitting him, and he asked the coach, he said, "All right, what do you want me to work on now?" He said, "I want you to stand there and I want you to shoot 1,000 of them in a row. And that's all I want you to do. But what about the other shots, coach? I want you to shoot that shot." So when the bell goes up, and he always worked on the basics of the game.
Yeah.
And he created, and most of the players that went there were not great names or great players when they went there. They became great players and great names, but they weren't when they went there. They were average players.
Yeah.
And he said, "You know what? I don't care if we lose as long as the team gave 100% on the floor, because I know I've done my job. But if we don't give 100% and we even win," he said, "I'm not okay with that." And it was like, that's how he rolled. And it was like, that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like, hey, the 10-foot jump shot, that's all you got to work on. Don't worry about the other stuff, because if you don't do that well, we're not going to win anyways.
Yeah, which goes back to, Don, what you're talking about, where we each have these gifts. And as long as we're in that lane, we're happy, we feel alive, we've got, we're passionate about what we're doing. And when we're in that lane, it's also what's best for the organization, so kind of same as a basketball team. And so when you think about as a leader, tell us, I mean, I kind of have an idea of what this is, and the audience might too, but what lights you up? If you had to say, out of all the things that you do, what's the one thing that lights you up the most?
Well, definitely contribution.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So the two things that most magnify who I am is growth and contribution. I grow so I can contribute, which is basically, a way of giving away the information or the insights that I have, that ultimately, I guess the final capacity of that would be seeing transformation in people. Because the transformational factor and seeing people come alive and seeing people light up when they find out, wow, I'm good at this, or I can actually contribute, and seeing them change, that's everything for me. So when I see that, it's like, that's better than any kind of rewards you can get monetarily, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. So Don, that's a really good segue into kind of closing out this episode. And if someone were interested in what you do, some of the books that you've written, maybe even speaking with you some more, where would you suggest they go?
They can, my website is donwlong.com. They can go there, and then I have an email if you'd like to email us, coaching@donwlong.com. And either way, you can reach out to me.
Fantastic. Well, Don, thank you so much for your time today and for all of this fantastic information. And your happiness is infectious. So I appreciate the last 20 minutes or so. And for those of you listening, if you would like to chat with me a little bit more, you can find me at 3V as in Victor consulting.com. And that's all spelled out, and would love to have a chance to chat with you. Until next time, everybody have a fantastic day.